Robert McNeil said in reference to A Brave New World that television was the equivalent of Soma. I would say that in our Brave New World, social media would be the equivalent to Soma. Hello, I'm Justin Perkins. This is Talk Junkie, and welcome to the Wastelands. Well, that may be a little bit dramatic, I don't know. We're in a very particularly weird and new situation in comparison to the world we used to live in the world we will live in after this coronavirus. In the midst of something like this and the ensuing shutdown and the quarantine and businesses closing down, what will change? What will be different after the quarantine's lifted? After this period, what comes next? You know, I've heard futurists theorize that there will come a day when we, for all intents and purposes, live life almost totally electronically, that we will be engulfed in an electronic dreamland, basically a matrix, basically a simulation of some sort, to where interaction is done digitally, to where human contact is never really personal. It's always virtual. We learned a couple things, even though we're not completely out of this. A lot of things will become more apparent once we've had time to reflect and look back. Hindsight is always the best. But even to this point, I think a lot of companies have realized maybe I don't need such big offices. Maybe I don't need to pay for all of the facility that I'm providing, the parking, the cubicles, the hardline phones. All these things are expenditures that maybe I don't need to create because it's becoming apparent that a lot of jobs can be done remotely. I don't think that's a bad thing. Actually, I think that's a good thing. I think that when it comes to work and certain types of jobs, that virtual access to that job is better than a physical access to that job because it allows people to have more of an opportunity to unplug. If you're working a 9 to 5, but you're spending an hour commute in the morning, an hour commute in the evening, then you're coming home and you didn't get done what you needed to get done at work because you had to focus on 15 other things that were not related to work, and plus you were there, you were tired, all these different variables, your day ends up being much longer than it needs to be. It's possible that by allowing that job to be done from home and you cut out the commute, you cut out all these things, well, you have more time for family, you have more time for personal things, and it also may just allow you to focus on yourself more. And that's not focusing on yourself in the means of it being selfish, but in it being responsible, because self-care is very, very important in regards to how you're able to treat other people and help other people in life. And I think that we'll see that coming forward. I think that's one of the things that when we get out of this quarantine will be obvious, that some jobs are better suited and are better financially for the company if done remotely. And I think that that's a plus. I think we also will see that some jobs were just unnecessary. Some jobs were antiquated and outdated and really didn't need to exist, and those jobs will be gone, and that's not necessarily a good thing anytime you lose jobs, but I think it's a natural progression. It's something that would have happened that has just been speeded up by this situation in the situation that we're in. I think that it'll change people in regards to how a certain segment of people will be prepared. Will they have a little bit of money put aside? Will they do something extra to get that money to put aside, even if it's just a little bit? But will they keep supplies? Will people stock up? Will people be preppers to some degree? I've mentioned 2 or 3 times about doing an episode on how I used to be a prepper and what I used to do, and that is coming soon. Just other things get in the way. You'll notice I'm not putting these out as often as I did before because the quarantine has changed my schedule. I like to do these when I'm alone, when I'm able to focus, and I'm not doing that right now. Spending time with my family, and that frankly is more important than trying to cut out some time alone to do a podcast. But I'm also writing. My book is, I would say, 99% complete. I just have to get the files. Well, I wouldn't say this. Let's say 90. Let's not go crazy. I'm playing a lot more music. I'm enjoying a lot more things. I'm reading more. I'm enjoying more music in general. I'm very fortunate in that, I've been quarantined with my wife and my son. Unfortunately, my daughter has not been with us. But for the most part, like I've had people to interact with. And that's good. That's a positive part of the quarantine for me, and it's something that I've enjoyed. Now, coming out of this quarantine, there's going to be a lot of people that will come to a realization that I came to years back, is they're going to have to return to jobs they hate. And it's not that I work for bad people or that my job, it's not what I want to do. And that sounds childish, and it is to a certain degree. Of course, I could have done what I wanted to do if only I'd pursued things differently and done things differently. And sometimes you get yourself into a point to where you can no longer go back and do that, and be fair to your family or be responsible with your family. And some people's families don't support them in a manner in which that they could do that. But a lot of people are going to realize that I got to go back to an existence that I didn't want. And I think that may wake some people up, and some people will go, okay, I definitely need to reevaluate life and what I'm doing with it and my choices. But I think some other people may, during this time, find some more satisfaction in the unreal, in the artificial, in social media and things of that nature, so that when they go back, they feel like, okay, I wasn't having to work and I was happy during this time, and during this time I was engulfed with social media, to where that part of their life becomes real to them, and the physical part of their life becomes dreaded, and that's an unfortunate mix-up. But I think it happens to a lot of people. Again, not something that's caused by something like a quarantine, but something that is definitely amplified by something like a quarantine. Now, we look at, there's an obvious push to be digital. There's an obvious push for change in a lot of segments of society, especially entertainment, and especially in regards to movies. Netflix is making movies on their own, movies that getting limited theatrical release or no theatrical release. A lot of companies are looking at doing that. Amazon's making movies. All these companies are making movies, and they're doing it in a model that does not include the movie theater. Now, I'm a little torn on this. I'm not a big movie goer because I'm not big on most newer movies. If you just put retro movies into a movie theater and started playing them nonstop, I'm going to go. I would go see all the movies I love from the 80s and 90s, 70s, even the early 2000s, even newer movies, as long as it's movies I was interested in the theaters. But I'm not a big financial supporter of movie theaters, not for any agenda or anything. It's just things don't pop up often that I enjoy and want to see. My son much prefers his entertainment at home. I would prefer to take him to a movie theater because it allows him to get out, which is something that he needs. But I think once we come out of this, AMC has said that they're basically probably not going to open back up and I think if my research is right, they were, I forget what number, but they're 1 or 2 maybe in the top movie theaters. They're up there on the top. I can't remember what it was. It was a long article, and I got confused a couple times. But they're probably not going to open back up. And this was the nail in the coffin. Now, in fairness, I think if we were being honest, and if we really looked at the data, that we would see that movie theaters were dying before this. and that's due to streaming and digital, and people want that access. So I believe, because in the area I'm in, we went from 2 movie theaters, and them being fairly full down to really 1, and I don't see how it's going to hold on. I don't see it making it through this. Maybe it could, but it was in pretty bad shape physically before this. I don't know about economically, but I would assume that it was in bad shape physically because it was in bad shape economically, and I just, I can't see them making it through, but maybe they will. I hope that they do. I really do hope that they do. What I could see happening is down the road, movie theater experience becoming a more retro experience, like I had mentioned, that you'll have these older movie theaters open back up completely under the kind of the business model of being a retro theater, showing E.T., showing Back to the Future, showing Ghostbusters, showing maybe Titanic, things that were huge box office draws at different points in time, or things that become cult classics like They Live, things of that nature. I could see a formula down the road of that working, because nostalgia has never been stronger. And, to people who grew up in the 80s and 90s and things of that nature, a couple places have had, some internet outages and things like that. It's become, on those times when social media is down and gone, it becomes real nostalgic for those people. Because they're taken back to a point in time where that wasn't an option. There was a different requirement. So I believe that nostalgia being the way it is, that coming out of this, that could be something we could look forward to seeing. Now, I heard on another podcast that there's a lot of talk about drive-in theaters coming back. Drive-in theaters are personally my favorite. I love drive-in theaters. I've not really got to experience them much as an adult, because every time we find one and go a couple times, it usually closes down, or it's so far away we can only go. Now I don't know of any locally open close to us, but that's something that, it allows for separation of people, and that may be something that sticks with us after this is over. And that may be why there's this talk of something like a drive-in theater coming back, because I believe the push for things to be digital, for in-home movie viewing and all that was already well on its way. This will be the catalyst for that. Now, coming out of this, will we still want to social distance? I think to a certain degree, definitely. I think we look at a place like China, and we see the people with the mask and stuff all the time, and we think of that as paranoia and this, but they're doing that against a very real thing, and that's their pollution level. It had nothing to do with infections or anything like that initially. Before all this happened, that was due to their pollution levels. So, we may switch to that nation of people wearing masks and things of that nature. I don't think the majority of Americans and a certain demographic of Americans can be seen to go that way. But I can see much older Americans going that way just for personal protection. And I can see much younger Americans going that way because it will kind of be in vogue and be chic maybe for the time. So it's possible that we see that coming out of this. But I do believe, despite the facial wear or the health precautions, that coming out of this we do see some level of social distancing being kept. Now, I don't know that we'll see that in a city like New York. To me, my time there, I can't see how New York could social distance. And without the threat of something like this, I don't know why they would want to. It is possible, though, that in more rural areas, and that you see that, or smaller cities, that you see that. And it's going to be that there will be a few counties or cities or states on smaller levels that try to enact certain types of distance. So that's kind of one of the fears. People talk about all these paranoid conspiracy theorists that are worried about everything through this time. Some of that's true, but some of that is logic and common sense and what we've seen in the past. When people are allowed to overreach, they habitually overreach from then on out. Very, very, very few times in history has an overreaching government ever pulled back, or an overreaching city council, or it's just not generally the case with things involving control-based stuff. Now, that's not to say that it's always bad or that it's always effective. A lot of times it's not effective at all, and it's initially phased out by people coming later. But as far as government action itself in that time, it's never just taken back. And you set precedents, and when you do, those precedents, allow for people to look back and go, but we did this for your best interest. And I think people worry about that. But I think we have proven, unless we change in the United States, to be pretty good at kind of stopping things like that in their tracks. A lot of times people don't appreciate the people who are doing that at the time, but in the long run, we're generally pretty good with that. When I look at this situation, and I look at it, and I think, what's the largest impact coming out of this going to be? That's really dependent on when we come out of this. If we came out of this today, there's three major things. One, our unpreparedness as a country for something like this. I believe that for the most part, I think we've done really good. People want to talk about our rates compared to other countries. Well, that's apples and oranges. Look at our size and our population compared to other countries. We're doing a phenomenal job. I think it's that we just have an innate ability, and possibly it is luck to some degree, that we react very well, and we have great instincts as a country, even when our leadership's not the best. Same way with states. Even when our leadership's not the best, we have great responses. But I think the government's at a loss because they did not expect this, and they were definitely not ready. So I think that's going to be a lasting impact. I think, in all honesty, that from the smallest local governments and organizations up, that hopefully, and I really believe that this will, in some way, spark a desire to be more prepared if this thing reaches the levels they're talking about. And I say that because the government and a lot of these organizations are going to look at one thing, and that's numbers and statistics. And at this point, this thing is not what it was painted to be. If we had a real number on infected cases, it's likely that the infection rate of this is very, very high. It's highly contagious. But it's also likely that the death rate is extremely, extremely, extremely low. And at one point, and I don't know if it was like 30-something maybe worldwide in deaths for the year. And I know that sounds morbid, but number-wise, I think in order for it to get the kind of attention I'd like to see it get, those numbers would have to be higher. I don't believe that this is the great epidemic of our lifetime. It's definitely not the great epidemic of the last 200 years. It's probably not going to be the epidemic of our lifetime. Now, That's the sad thing. At this point, unless the numbers have changed, I haven't looked back, we've had, I think H1N1 may have been more deadly to date than this one. But my concern is what comes after this. You know, this is proof things will jump. If you listen to the fear-mongering, fear and mongering in Eastern Kentucky, I think it was, or UKY, I can't remember what I named the episode, but I talk about a disease that would be petrifying if it got, and you know, it's an animal-based disease, but so was this. So I hope that this does have an impact on how we get prepared from the ground up, from county, state, and federal, how we prepared for something like this. Another large impact of this thing that I hope is felt, and there's two of these, and one could counter the other. The first thing is economically, this thing will be devastating. I don't think people are really looking at that. When you look at small businesses and things of that nature, I mean, Walmart's going to be fine. You know, some of the fast food restaurants are going to be fine. Local establishments are really going to struggle, and that's sad. But it's due to the policies in place to protect us, which I don't understand how Walmart is up. I understand we have to be able to get things, but if you go into a Walmart, it is a direct spit in the face of the policies that are shutting down privately owned businesses and bankrupting them. Now, I know people are talking about, well, it's unemployment for everybody. No, that's not real. It's not unemployment for small business owners. I know numerous small business owners that it's not possible. They don't get it. They can't apply for it. You know, they've even made it applicable for substitute teachers. My wife was a substitute teacher. She, of course, has not been able to access the unemployment. And that's another thing. Even if it was available, would they be able to sign up for it and get it? Where I'm at, that's becoming very hard to do. So, you know, yeah, they're giving an extra $600 a month, this, but if you can't physically get your hands on it, it really makes no impact. It doesn't matter. And if you get it 6 months from now and they go, but you'll get your back pay. But what does that do for what you've lost in that time or what you've got behind in that time? Penalties and fines and things of that nature really magnify that situation and make it worse than it would have been. So, you know, some people say better late than never. Some people say too little, too late. So, but these local businesses, some of these business owners, you know, a good majority of them, they're not getting unemployment. They're out of money on the small business loans. That probably went mostly to friends and a couple of legitimate places, and that's it. Because we're still realize we're trusting a corrupt government to manage this money, you know, and also allowing that group to pick and choose who closes and who opens. So economically coming out of this situation is going to be devastating, really devastating. And, you know, we're looking at extremely high unemployment rates right now, and people are saying, yes, but that's because people are off due to the quarantine. When everybody goes back, those numbers will go down. They will go down, but they won't go back down to the extremely low unemployment rate we had before this, because a lot of these businesses are going to be out of work. And I mean, Walmart will probably hire. You know, I read a report once, and I don't know if this still holds true, that Walmart was the largest employer in Kentucky, and it was that way in many states, and that, you know, that's probably not going to change anytime soon. Actually, if anything, that's probably going to amplify, and they're going to become much larger employees. So some parts of the private sector are going to definitely benefit. Unfortunately, I don't feel that it's always the parts that help us. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that Walmart, being a large employer and stuff, is a good thing. And I want to see Walmart come out of this. For Walmart to go under would be devastating for the United States of America. Devastating. Because it's so many jobs, so much, you know, on paper, it really is kind of a Chinese-owned company, has been my understanding since it was sold by the original family. But still, its impact in America is huge, and it is a vital part of our economy. But it's not the only part of our economy, and the other parts of our economy are going to be hurting really bad once we come out of this. And that concerns me. Now, what could be a kind of a bright spot in all that darkness is hopefully common sense has prevailed, and voters and government officials and just people in general have realized we are depending greatly on imports for very vital things like medicine and masks and respirators and things of that nature from overseas, mainly from China, a country that we've been shown that we can't trust their data, their intel, and that they are willing to entertain the threat and thought of keeping things from us that we need. And we, who have put sanctions and embargoes and taxes against them to try to help them pay for our economy, are so reliant on them that we don't know that that's going to be possible to do. And I feel that that's a good thing to put those restrictions on a company that's kind of raping your economy and your people, but you also have to hold your people responsible. Now, that may allow for us to bring some of that production back. But a couple things would have to be accepted in order to do that. That producing those things is probably, at this current time, a $15 to $20 an hour job, not a $45 an hour job. In that getting in there and getting contracts and trying to constantly get that up to, because see, to me, $45 an hour is a trade pay scale. That is to say, if you wanted to go learn how to weld, which would pay you anywhere from $45 to $105 an hour, depending on where you go, and there's a large lack of trade work, then that's a skill you've learned and a value. But this is an agreed upon thing. Like, this is a production thing. There may end up being trade jobs in that. But if we can accept that it's a job that's at least double minimum wage, but less than an extravagant amount, like $40, $45 an hour, and if we can understand that those products will cost a little more because they're American made, then we understand that those prices are offset by the jobs that are brought in and by the stability that it gives to the country. Then there's a possibility that could have a good reaction in regards to those jobs coming back and it kind of offsetting the job loss. But it won't be immediate. I feel like coming out of this, there's the high probability for recession at the least. If we look at different time periods in the past in which we have experienced recessions, and we look at the markers for those things, we're in a situation that will have some of those markers. It will have job loss. It will have, we've had a large run of inflation. We'll have all these precursors. Then we'll offset that with going from a extremely low unemployment to a high unemployment. We'll have all these things that will probably trigger this recession. I don't feel that it'll trigger a depression, because I don't. When looking at the Great Depression and looking at government markers and looking at these things, the government has the ability to step in and stop something like that now, unlike they did in the past. In the past, they really didn't have the potential for job creation and things of that. And there's the opportunity there to prevent something like another Great Depression. But I do feel it coming out of this, just looking at financial markers from past things and some papers I've read, that it's likely we'll come into a recession coming out of this. The thing about this new recession that some of these guys are predicting is they're predicting a digital boom after. This could result in a very large growth in the tech world. You're always looking for positives, and a lot of these experts are looking at a growth in the tech world. And me looking at it as an uneducated outsider, if I look at this and I say, okay, well, all these companies are recognizing that virtual meetings and work at home and all these things are beneficial, but there needs to be a groundwork laid there. There needs to be systems put in place. There needs to be companies to monitor these. And so if you look at it on a large scale, obviously you're going to have large-scale companies that are already in place, companies like Cisco or Google, or companies that are able to step into these Fortune 500 companies and equip them with the ability to interact and work from home and teleconference and stuff. And the states are also going to be able to access these same types of companies. And those companies will have to hire more. They're going to need technicians. They're going to need people. So you could have a rise in that job market. But on the same sense, small local companies may make that decision. Small local government may make that decision. It may become an easier way to prevent for commutes and things of that nature, and things on a smaller scale. Say, the difference in these large companies in New York City using companies such as Google or someone to do it, or even Apple, because I think that companies like Apple will see a great boost out of this. But on the other hand, a smaller company in Lexington that may feel like, okay, we've got people in Lexington, Kentucky, but we've got people in Winchester, we've got people in Richmond, Berea, we need a virtual link for this. Then they go to a little bit smaller contractor, or quite a bit smaller contractor actually, almost a microscopic contractor when you're speaking on the level of someone like Google. And that affords companies like that to open. And, I think that the technological sector that is always growing anyway, especially in the world that we live in today, will see a growth if that becomes, and so that's a positive to look at. I try to look for the positives in this. I do feel like our economy will hurt after this, but I think that's the potential for a positive. Now, something that I can't remember. This has been 10 or 15 years ago. I was sitting and talking to someone, and I forget what we were talking about, a movie or something we had seen, and I said, so then we get talking about the future and how things will change, and I said, one day I wonder if it will be possible to the point to where sports lessen in America. And since that time, since I had that conversation, sports, if anything, have amplified. They've gotten bigger, more important, grander. And looking back on that conversation, I never foreseen something like this. Now, I don't believe that this will kill sports. I believe this will affect sports economically. I believe that some people will go, wow, I've wasted every Sunday or every whatever day watching a sport when I could have done something else, something more worthwhile with my time, to where sports will become more about just entertainment on an occasional basis than a ritual. But some people will keep that ritual. They definitely will. Sports have a very important role in their life. I can tell you that my wife and daughter, that it will not affect their love or really obsession with University of Kentucky athletics in any way. They're still going to be just as overwhelmingly excited about it as they ever were. Maybe more so. And people like myself who don't really get anything out of sports anymore, they're not going to turn to sports, I don't believe. I believe less people will go back to sports initially. I believe that that teams and companies and arenas, they obviously did take a loss during this time, and they will want that to reflect in pay, and they will want that to reflect in ticket prices. And so events will either, there's two ways they could go with that. Events can either start out dirt cheap to kind of get a feel for if people are interested, or to get people back into the groove. But then I look for prices to go up substantially. I look for prices to go up substantially across the board on most items and most things. We can already see that during this time. There's prices increasing at this time, not on gas, obviously, but that really has nothing to do with the coronavirus. That has more to do with what's going on in the Middle East with OPEC and these other countries wanting to control production and things of that nature. But with sports, I look at it as they're going to try to pay less and take in more to compensate for this. And I think they feel invincible. I think they feel like the day this is released, they go back to being the most valuable entity in the United States. And I'm curious is that what will really happen? Will they really go back to that? I can imagine a point in time in human history without sporting events, to a certain degree. I won't say without any sporting events, but I can see it losing its appeal and its profitability. I think it's a good thing. Physical competition and activity is a very good thing. I think it eventually will go back to being a more personal thing, which I think is much better. But I don't think that this is the point in time. I think that they will come back fairly strong through this. I really do. Maybe not that particular leagues may not come back and do extremely well. I don't know. Maybe this breaks the NHL. Maybe this changes Major League Baseball to where it has to be two completely separate leagues. Maybe it does the same for basketball. Maybe football has to cut games. I don't know. But I do feel like they will come back and definitely be prosperous at some point after this. So to whoever that was, when we had that great conversation, I still feel that there'll be a time where sports are less prioritized. I just don't believe that this is it. And I made a remark on Facebook, and somebody that, I fairly well respect his opinion, thought that I was wrong for making, that I didn't understand how athletes make what they make. And I understand why they make it. And I don't understand why we put the value that we put on it. And his remark was that I should, just be happy. In some respect, his remark basically was, I'm probably butchered, that any time that poor people make money, it's good. I don't disagree with that. But that same athlete making $250,000 a year instead of $80 million for a contract, he's still bettering himself. He's still doing better. I don't think the player, the company, anybody's really doing anything wrong. I mean, that's free market. I don't think that. It's more, to me, of a reflection on how I feel about society and how I like, what if we spent some way, we had a way to monetize other things in life? But see, then they become victim to the same thing. They become victim to, okay, what if we monetize teaching to that degree, because teachers are extremely important? Well, we can't monetize it privately like sports have been monetized, because if we did, then you'd have amazing schools with amazing teachers, and you would have other schools with less than it. That's called private schools. So, I couldn't. I want to say, and that was my belief is, what if doctors I'm sorry, not doctors, they make plenty of money for limited ability. What if nurses, and what if teachers, and what if firemen, and what if police officers, and what if soldiers made that amount of money? Well, that would be awesome that they were rewarded for that. But in the sense of police officers making more, I always say we want to keep politicians from being a profitable thing. If we made policing a profitable thing, then there would be more corruption in policing, just like there's more corruption in politicians. And, if being a soldier was a profitable thing, then that would make war even more profitable than it is, and it's the most profitable thing in the world. So, I don't know. That's an ideal I need to think about. It's something that I may feel a certain way about, but I'm obviously wrong about it somewhere. Somebody that I think has a pretty level head points out something, and that's the thing is, the overall thing is, if we're going to end this with anything, We've talked about all this stuff about the virus, and I'm almost done. But let's end it in this. And it will help with all things in life. If you think something, feel something, say something, believe something, make sure that you've taken the time to evaluate it from all sides. And that you feel confident that you've made an unbiased, accurate assumption or belief about that. Preferably an educated one with research and statistics. But no matter how much research, no matter how many statistics, no matter how deep the belief, that when it's questioned, you at least look at it and go, okay, do I still really feel that way? Is it correct? Am I right? If you won't question yourself, not on the point to where you doubt everything you do, but question your beliefs. If you can't question your beliefs, truly question them. Truly just get in there and beat them up like your greatest critic would do, and come out the other end still believing them, then maybe your belief wasn't that strong. Because there are beliefs you will do that with that you'll hold, and you'll realize, okay, at least for now, I have full confidence in this belief. And there are beliefs like the one I just mentioned that you'll get to and go, you know what, maybe I was wrong. And that's relative to who you surround yourself with. I've got a lot of friends who I appreciate their opinion. And I've got a lot of friends who, if they say something, I'll give it thought. I've got friends that are, look, they're puppets like anybody else, and I love them to death, and I'd take a bullet for them, but look, they just believe what they're told, and it's infuriating to go on. But I have friends who I truly believe put thought and compassion into their beliefs, and that means a lot. So be willing to question yourself. Be willing to think the opposing thoughts and look at the opposing data, and be willing more than anything to be wrong when you are, because that makes it more valuable when you're right. Being right and being truly right is a lot more reassuring to your future self than entertaining a false notion forever just because that notion felt good. Because a lot of times being wrong is always uncomfortable for people, especially at first. Once you get used to it, that changes, but it's uncomfortable having to adopt a new belief sometimes. But sometimes that's the best thing you can do. I guess we kind of started this with a quote by Robert McNeil, and then I threw my little 2 cents in there, and I'll say it again. In regards to Soma, as it's referred to in A Brave New World, in our modern world, I believe that our version of Soma would be social media. Don't be bad to people. Like, comment, share. Support your local businesses. Red Spotted Newt, Hazard, Kentucky. READ, Red Spotted Newt, Hazard, Kentucky. Roundabout Music in Whitesburg. As soon as this opens back up and we can get back at Chain Reaction BJJ in Hazard, Kentucky, the greatest group of people I've ever been around in my life. Come learn jiu-jitsu. If you don't live here, if you live in Lexington, Kentucky, check out Reaction MMA when all this opens back up. An unbelievable professor there, Rob Nickerson. Some of the best people that have ever been around in my life. AuthorJPerk@gmail.com. YouTube page is J Perkins. The other stuff's the other stuff. Don't suck, don't die, and be good to each other.